Welcome back, and in this lesson we're actually going to get into styling our images that are part of our homepage. So in this lesson we'll add the styles to size our images using classes in CSS. We'll add some padding around the images themselves to make things fit a little bit nicer on the page. Then we're going to size our H1 heading so that we can actually size and position that on our page correctly. We're going to size and style our H3 headings, which are actually the subheadings for our chapters. And then we're going to add a text shadow to our H3 heading so I can show you one of the new features of CSS3, which I think is extremely cool. Because up until this time it was really hard to do this, and now we can actually add text shadows in CSS3 all by itself, nothing else. Too cool to mention. Anyway, let's get back into our development environment and continue styling our homepage. Alright, so let's drop out of our presentation, get into our development environment, and I'll tell you right now, those image sizes are driving me crazy. So let's resize them with CSS and position them a little bit better on our page. But first I want to move one of our images. I'm going to get back into the index.html file and get up where our images are, because I want to move one of our images to pull its association with the second article that makes up our page. In an earlier part of the lessons, we talked about document flow and how important it is that we flow things the way that we want them to appear. Well, I actually want this second image to be associated with this second article. So I'm going to move the second image just below and inside that first article tag. So I'm going to select it here. I'm going to do Control X on the PC, Command X on the Mac to cut it out. I'm going to come down right below that second article, and I'm going to do Control V on the PC, Command V on the Mac to paste it in place. I want that to fall below our second article. So if we save those changes and I refresh the browser window, now you should see that we've got the first image, we've got our first text, a group of text, then we got the second image and a second group of text. And the reason I want to do this is I want my layout to be with an image on one side and then the text on the other. So I'm going to break it technically into two columns, but I'm going to have the first image is going to be on the left with the text on the right. Second image is going to be on the right with the text on the left. So I want to show you how we can lay these out differently based on how we set up not only the structure of the HTML code inside of our index.html document, but also by using our CSS. So now let's give each image a size class. So I'm going to go inside here, and inside my image tag, I'm going to add a class to the tag itself. I'm going to say class equal, and inside single or double quotes, either one, whichever one you care to use, I'm going to put size. I'm going to go ahead and copy that because I want to give the same class to my other image. So I'm going to come down here, and inside the image tag, I'm actually going to put that class also. So both my images now are sharing a class called size, which we're actually going to set up in our CSS file. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. Good time to pause for you to type those in. Let me go ahead and scroll up just a little bit so you can see both of those easily. Now what I want to do is I want to go in my CSS file and I want to address that size class that we just created. So I'm going to go in the main.css file and I'm going to come down a couple of lines and I'm going to say size, and because this is a class, I'm going to start it with a period, not a pound sign. Remember, pound signs are for IDs, periods are for classes. Then I'm going to have my opening and closing curly braces. I want to give it a height of 150 pixels. And by only assigning the height, what I'm doing is I'm actually keeping the proportions as they are to the graphic. So by sizing the height, it's going to adjust the width based on that size of the height, keeping it proportional. Then I actually want to put a border. So I'm going to add a border to this image. And again, it's going to be 1 pixel. I want to make it solid. And you'll see what this does in a minute. I'm going to use 999, which is a darker gray. And then I want to add a padding of 2 pixels. So inside that border, I'm going to put a 2 pixel padding around the image itself. So it kind of looks like an old-fashioned Polaroid shot. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. Let me scroll up just a bit. Good time to pause if you want to type those in. If we go into our browser now and refresh, you'll notice now we've got this nice graphic that's 150 pixels high for both our graphics, and we've got that nice little gray border around it with our 2 pixel padding. If you actually look in there, you can see the padding between the blue and the border. 2 pixel padding around the image itself. And we could increase the padding if we wanted to, make it 3 pixels if you wanted to be a little more offset. The beauty with padding is if I use one value, in fact, I'm going to show you how this works. If I use one value, it pertains to all 4 sides. But just like margins, if I were to use the top and bottom, let's say I wanted the top and bottom 5 pixels, The left and right 3, I could actually do it that way. Let's go ahead and save that change, refresh the browser so you can see the difference. You'll notice now I've got a little bigger border on the top and bottom than I do the left and right. Let's say that I wanted the top 5 pixels, the right 3 pixels, the bottom 15 pixels, and the left 3 pixels. I could actually do it that way also, and it's going to read like a clock. Top, right, bottom, left. So 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Save those changes, refresh my browser window, and you'll notice now that looks a lot more like the Polaroid with the big white gap at the bottom. I just wanted to show you that we can actually adjust all 4 sides individually. Personally, for this particular demonstration, I'm going to leave this set at 2 pixels on all 4 sides. So I'm going to put it back to 2, save the change, refresh our browser window, and we've got that nice little gray border around our image now, and it's sized much more appropriately for this particular page. One thing I have noticed that we have everything is tight up against this edge. Because we use that CSS reset, we took out all the default padding and margins, and everything's tight up against the top, tight up against this left edge. Let's go ahead and make a slight adjustment to our container where we can actually fix that a little bit. I'm going to go back to that container ID that we styled earlier, and I'm going to add another style to it. I'm going to say padding, and this padding I want to be 15 pixels on the top and bottom and 10 pixels on the left and right. So I'm going to save that change, and that's just going to give us a little bit of spacing around our text and around our graphics. So if we save the change, great time to pause if you need to put that in. I'm going to refresh the browser window, and you'll notice now we've got this nice little gap. That's actually making our page look a lot more professional because we're coming off that edge and pushing things out a little bit. Now let's style the main title. I want to style this main title right here. And that's going to be very easy to style because we actually have a way to identify that. Since we only have one H1, I can style it using the actual tag element itself. So I'm going to go into my CSS. I'm going to come right down below my homepage styles, and I'm going to type in the H1 element tag, and I'm going to put in here, and I'm actually going to change the font family. Now what I've done, the reason I moved this to the top, when I set up my style sheets, and this is all personal preference, you can do this any way you want. When I set up my style sheets, I normally put the tags at the top, then I follow those by IDs, and then I follow those by classes. And in those groups, I make them alphabetical, so it's easier for me to find things on large sheets. Now, for navigation and stuff, I'll usually put that in its own little section with a note. But again, when I'm doing elements and tags, IDs, and classes, I tend to put them tags first, IDs, then classes, and I tend to put them alphabetically in those groups. So the first thing I want to style for that particular H1, let's change the font family. One of the beautiful things we can do in CSS is add fonts and fonts families. I'm going to make this font family Times New Roman, Times, or Serif. You'll notice when I've got multiple words, the words are enclosed in quotation marks if there's a space. And the reason I'm using multiple fonts is in the event my system doesn't have one of these, it'll scroll to the next one. So it starts at Times New Roman. If it doesn't have it, it goes to Times. And if it doesn't have that, it goes to the default serif font for that particular OS. Then I'm going to add a font size. So I'm going to come down right below that, and I'm going to add a font size of 2.5 M. M's is a measurement we use in CSS. It's very dynamic, and it's based on the size of the letter M in the particular font that we're using. Then I'm going to add some letter spacing to put a little bit of space between these characters because, again, it is a main title, and I want to align this to the center of the page. So I'm going to come down right below the letter spacing and put in a text align of center. And that's actually going to align that text now in the center of that container element because it's going to be centered based on the parent, and the H1 is in the container. Let's go ahead and save all those. Great time for you to pause if you need to type those in. There, by the way, there's multiple different ways that we can measure inside of CSS. We have M's, rems, pixels, and percentages. Those are the ones that we use most often. There's actually a few more that we can use, but the ones we use most often are M's, rems, percentages, and pixels. All right, let's go ahead and save all the changes. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser window and see if we've impacted our title. And you'll notice now we've got a nice title that's centered inside our container. Now I want to go ahead and style these subheadings. And they're going to be, I'm going to style those a little bit differently because we're going to use a brand new CSS property called text shadow. So I'm going to go back into my main.css file. This is an H3, so I'm going to come right below my H1, open and close my curly braces with that H3. And the first thing I want to do is I want to change the font because I want you to see that you can have multiple fonts inside your documents. So I'm going to change this to a Comic Sans MS, cursive, or a sans serif. I'm going to give it a font size of 22 pixels. Normally I would keep all my sizing consistent, but I want you to see that there's different ways to do things in the demonstration. So this time we'll use pixels. I'm actually going to change the color of this font and give it a bluish color, and that's going to be #069. That's the hexadecimal value for the color I'm using. And then I want to add a text shadow to it, and this is kind of a cool styling technique because just a few years ago we would have had to do this in all variety of different ways, normally with graphics, but now we can actually use a property called text-shadow, and I can actually do an offset. And these values are the horizontal shadow, that's the first value. The second value is the vertical shadow. The third value is the blur radius, and the fourth value is the color that I want to use. So I'm going to use a kind of a light gray. I'm going to be 2 pixels horizontal, 2 pixels vertical, and then 3 pixels of blur. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. Great time to pause if you need to type those in. Going to refresh our browser window, and now our H3 should take on a brand new type of styling, and they do. They actually look quite nice. I actually like using that as one of my title fonts, and you'll notice that really nice text shadow that's behind them, and you can play with these numbers. If you want to, you can play with your numbers to set them different offsets so that you can learn more about this particular property. I normally like the 2, 2, and 3 because it just gives it a nice appearance, but that was 3, 3, and 3. Let's give it a blur of 10, and you'll see some dramatic difference in this one by changing the blur that much. You see now it's almost like an outline of the text itself. Let's take this back down to 3. Let's make a vertical shadow of 13 with a horizontal shadow of 3, and you'll see the difference in how those look between vertical and horizontal. And you'll notice now it's really dropped it down in the cell. It almost looks like it's a shadow of itself, like the sun's beating down from the top of it. And again, it's just to give you an idea of how you can play with these values to get different effects with your text. Now I'm going to mess with the horizontal, and you can probably guess what that one's going to do, and it's going to push it to the right. You can actually see where we've got that 10 pixel push to the right now. All right, I'm going to change these back to 2 and 2 because I think that looks nice for this particular page. I really like this new text shadow property. It's been a long time in the making. I'm really glad it's here, and I think it really adds a lot of capabilities to stuff that we can do to our site. So in the next lesson, what we're going to look at is we're actually going to style our navigation for our homepage. So I hope you're picking up a lot. I hope you're learning some things about CSS and how we set up HTML and CSS to style a page, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.